we're really happy. The Charleston Remembrance Committee, the virtual Sankofa group, we're really happy to have with us today Linda Holmes and Chadra Pittman. And today we're going to be, our theme is Ancestors, Mothers of the Movement, Toni Cade Bambara, Midwives, and the Middle Passage, of course, and Remembrance. So if you, what I'd like first is to just get some brief introductions of each of you. So Linda, let's start with you. If you can introduce yourself, just give us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Okay.
Thank you. And I love those glasses, by the way.
So this, the brief introduction is, I live here in Hampton, Virginia, and fortunately we met up some time ago around Sankofa, but my work essentially has been as a cultural worker, as a term that Toni Cade Bambara likes to use, but mostly as a writing person, a person who loves to write, and also a person who loves to collect oral histories. I've done oral histories around midwifery. I've done oral histories around civil rights. I've done oral histories around women's movements. And the work that I did in terms of writing the book, the biography about Toni Cade Bambara, is largely a collection of oral histories and stories of people talking about their relationships with Toni and their involvement with Toni. And so my whole life, I'm now 71 years old, and now clearly seeing myself as an elder, has been devoted to capturing the voices of those who are heard, but also the voices of those who have not been heard. So I think that summarizes my work in terms of the work that I'm passionate about. I've also been passionate about the work that I've done around health disparities, which is something that we're talking a lot about now, something that we should never stop talking about. But and it also connects to the idea of remembrance. It's kind of like we're pretending that maybe, disparities didn't exist before, as disparities have been with us for since we've been here in the United States, beginning from the era of enslavement. But I'm also interested in documenting health disparities and how we as a people have been able to take care of ourselves in many ways. So it's pretty much collecting stories that relate to our history as the people of African descent.
Okay, great. So we're going to get a little bit more into your work in a minute. But Chadra, if you would just give us an intro and a little overview of yourself, who you are, just an introduction and what your work is about.
Okay, so again, as I was saying, it's wonderful to be on this call with you and with Linda. So my work. So I'll start here and say that, I am born and bred in the Bronx, New York. I say I'm northern born, but I'm southern raised because my parents are from Alabama and North Carolina. So that gives me, I think, an interesting perspective in life, having those two experiences of the North and the South. I studied anthropology and African American studies. I worked at the African Burial Ground Project for a number of years, where I was very happy to meet you, Deborah, as we know. That's our beginning. And through that work, moved on to Virginia and started the Sankofa Projects and also another organization called Forever. Sankofa looks at educational, cultural, and social justice as it relates to the African diaspora. And Forever is an advocacy group that works to end rape and violence globally. So I tell people my work is involving race, R-A-C-E, and rape, R-A-P-E. And also, it's interesting when I was hearing Linda speak, as an anthropologist, I don't do the excavation, but what I excavate is history. I uncover the untold stories of our past because I believe only through those untold stories are we going to be able to move forward into the future, having a true understanding of who we are. So yes, just really happy to be on this call with you two today to talk about Toni Cade Bambara.
Okay, so before we get started with getting into that part of it, can we just get a definition of ancestors from each of you? Just give us a little, let's talk about ancestors a little bit. Your definition, the importance of honoring ancestors, in what ways you honor your ancestors, and how ancestors manifest themselves through you in your daily lives and in your work.
So I can
Yes.
just say, can I jump in? So for me, I've always felt very connected. I grew up in the church, but I always felt very connected to something else. And I really didn't know what that something else was until later in life. And for me, it is the connection to the ancestors. I think how I would define an ancestor, it is someone who has lived, who has passed away. It is someone that I tap into, that I know that I invite into spaces with me. So my ancestors are always with me. They are not, you know, as Sweet Honey in the Rock sings about the song about breaths, you know, they're in the rocks, they're in the trees, they're everywhere, they're all around me. And I make it my business, my personal business, to always speak of the ancestors, teach my children about the ancestors, acknowledge the ancestors in every way that I can. I do that largely by doing libations. That's a big part of the work that I do for programs. I'm often called to do libations and call on and evoke the spirit of the ancestors. And by doing that, what we're doing is we're inviting them to come into our lives. We're inviting them to come and be with us to help navigate, you know, this land that we're on. So for me, they're vitally important. And I, as I said, incorporate them in everything that I do daily. So, and I have an altar which has things on them. It could be as simple as having a picture of, let's say, my father who passed away, a picture and a candle. And I pay reverence to that, and I acknowledge his presence in the spiritual realm.
Yeah.
Yes, Linda?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that because as Chadra was saying, ancestors are living spirits, you know. I think before my awakening around the idea of ancestors, you know, you kind of thought of the person as having died, but the spirit lives, right? And the
Absolutely.
spirit is always present with us. And I think my first beginning to reflect on the idea of ancestors actually came from my grandmother. Toni Cade Bambara gave us this wonderful assignment to go interview our grandmothers, right? When I was a student of hers, when I was at Livingston College, Rutgers University, and she assigned us to go interview our grandmothers. And up until that point, I thought of my grandmother as the person who was the elder in the family, but had not paid too much attention to the names in the Bible, right? But then I began to understand them as not just as names in the Bible, but as living, right, in our family still and yet in present. And one of the things I learned from my grandmother was that she used to call me Linda Lou, right? And I'm from New Jersey, and my grandmother, this is Udingertown, Kentucky, an independent Black community that was established right after the Civil War. But when I was with my grandmother, she explained that Mama Lou was her grandmother, right? My grandmother's grandmother. And so then I began to embrace that idea of Lou as a spirit that my grandmother saw in me, possibly, right? And so then that became a way for the ancestor to live within. And similar to Chadra, I also spend time in meditation. I frequently call the names of the ancestors. I have pictures in my house, and I love talking about the ancestors. And we talk about our ancestors at family reunions and some of the genealogy work that I've been doing. And most recently, spending time with traditional midwives has helped me to get in Africa, on the continent, to understand ancestors, and I can talk about this a little bit more later, as a very much a living presence in our lives that inform not only ritual, but what I do and what I hear and what I see.
Right.
Okay.
If I could just piggyback on something real quick, Deborah, is that okay?
Yes.
So I just wanted to say, you know, part of what I find so interesting is that whenever I do programs and I'm in settings or I go to churches, which I often do because my point is that everyone needs to know our history. So I go everywhere, churches, prisons, community centers, it doesn't matter. And what I often tell people, when you say ancestors, there's this, you know, there's this fear that seems to come over people. And what I often tell people who, let's say, are Christian, who want to participate in these kinds of remembrances and tributes, I break it down really simply to tell them that everyone that is in the book, which is their holy book, their Bible, lived and died, right? So if they lived and died, Jesus himself is indeed an ancestor.
Mm-hmm.
So I say that to them to help demystify, to take away some of the stigma around African spirituality, because people think that if you talk about ancestors, that you are participating in other worldly religions, and you may be, but there's this fear around ancestors. And so I think it is essential for who we are and where we are in this foreign land that we all find ourselves in, that we embrace the connection to our ancestors. I think that will be part of what helps to bring us back to center. So I just wanted to say that, you know, it's vital that we remind people that the God that they serve, Jesus himself, if you believe in that, and if that is your faith, you can believe in Jesus and you can also believe in your ancestors, because he also was one.
Okay. Yes, Chadra, could you tell us a little bit about your work at the African Burial Ground? What did working at the ABG, the African Burial Ground, what did it teach you? And how did that work set the stage for your operating a remembrance program?
Okay, well, working at the African Burial Ground was an absolute dream come true, and I mean that sincerely.
And maybe you should tell people what the African Burial Ground actually is.
Okay, so let me go back. Let's do Sankofa, right? Let's go back to go forward. So yes, so the African Burial Ground,
No.
Okay, I'm sorry, I thought you said something. So the African Burial Ground is a burial ground that was rediscovered in 1991. It was a burial ground that had been hidden for many years. Now, it wasn't hidden on the historical maps. People knew that the African Burial Ground, or what they were calling it, the Negroes' burying ground, existed. So map surveyors, people who knew city records, historians knew that the burial ground existed. But to the common person walking on the street, you would never know that it was there because there was no physical evidence. There were no grave marks. You know, it had been covered over by the city. So the government, the General Service Administration, decided that they were going to build a $276 million building in Lower Manhattan. But before they could do that, they have to do what's known as a cultural resource survey. And a cultural resource survey is done so that the integrity, the historical integrity of whatever is beneath the ground will be preserved. So when they started to look at historical maps from the 1700s, they said, oh, there's this Negroes burying ground here. They said, well, you know, it was many years ago, 300 years ago, we're not going to find anything there. They start excavating and they come up with bones. So to fast forward, the bones were first being studied. Lehman College was housing the bones. The problem with that is that they were not handling the bones in a way that would ensure the preservation of the bones, because when you take 300-year skulls of human beings out of the ground, you cannot wrap them in current day newspaper, because what happens is it leaves an impression on the bone. They weren't wrapping them in the acid-free paper. So the community got involved, and the community said, we want Black leadership. We want Black anthropologists to lead this project. We want anthropologists and historians to be the ones to tell our story moving forward. And so Dr. Michael Blakey at Howard University was called in and the bones went to Howard and were studied. 419 intact men, women, and children were excavated, and then they were reinterred years later after being researched. I first learned about the African burial ground when I was in college, and I was a student of anthropology at George Mason. And my professor, Dr. Marilyn Mobley, I was taking an African American literature course. We were studying Toni Morrison. She's a Toni Morrison scholar. And she came in one day with a newspaper clipping. Now, you know, this is a long time ago because it was who has newspaper clippings, right? Typically, it's your cell phone. You're showing somebody an article. But she brought the newspaper clipping and she said, you have to know about this, because she knew that I was an anthropology student. In my entire time at George Mason, I did not have one Black anthropology professor. And that was troublesome. I mean, the only Black professors I had were in the African American Studies department. So when I came to the African burial ground, even that, how I got hired, I'd been trying to work at the African burial ground for a couple of years. Once I found out that they were at Howard, I said I want to work there, but I didn't have the osteology experience to study, you know, which is having experience working with the bones, the skeletal remains. I said, you know what? I came to visit Howard University one weekend, got a newsletter, went back to New York. As I'm reading it, I see that they have a New York office, and called up and said, hey, what do you do? And they said, this is the Office of Public Education and Interpretation of the African Burial Ground. And it was there that I began working straight after college. And I like to tell people that story because, you know, people said to me when I first embarked upon anthropology, what are you going to do with that? What are you going to do with that kind of work? You know, how are you going to make a living? And so I do believe I was led to that project. Working at the African burial ground was transformative. I made lifelong friendships. That's where I met Deborah, who has been a rock in my life for all these years. Working at the burial ground, that was my first understanding of remembrance ceremonies. We had African priests coming to the actual grounds to atone for their participation in slavery. It was the first time that I ever heard of anyone or saw anyone pouring a libation on the ground. I had never seen that growing up in a Presbyterian Black church, right? I didn't know the power of that. I saw people drumming. I saw people wearing African garb. I saw people connected to their history and their culture in a way that I had never seen before. And for me, seeing the community, I mean, we had a very strong volunteer activist community that came out to support the programs that we did. One of the things that the community did, which I love to say, is that the community fought for the change of, you know, people were referring to the Africans, and a lot of the scholars were too, I have to tell you. So, you know, when people talk about scholars and versus community, I believe we have community scholars as well. It was a community that said, you need to stop calling our ancestors slaves. And I remember thinking, wow, these are community people in meetings with the scholars, with the people in the high governments, and they would stop them mid-sentence. And the reason why is because, and Deborah, you know this because we used to do slide presentations, the reason why the community fought against using the word slave is because when we look at the historical documents from early New York, the African free schools, the African Methodist Episcopal Church, the African Mutual Relief Society, all of these organizations use the word African. They never refer to themselves as slaves. They never refer to themselves as Negro or colored. They were African. They were very clear about their identity. So we took it upon ourselves to move forward. And when we would do presentations, we would go out and we would teach people about the power of language, the power of calling our ancestors by their rightful names. And so, I mean, in every aspect of my life. So when I'm doing presentations now, that is a huge part of my presentation. One of the things that came out of the burial ground was I got a chance to get published. Dr. Blakey, and this was Transforming Anthropology. This was burial number 25. She was a woman who had a Lefort fracture to her skull. She was hit with a blunt object. You can see her face is crushed. And she has a musket ball laying in her ribs, which means she was shot. This woman was only 21 years old and was murdered. So since that time, I have been all about the ancestors, and I've continued to do that work with my annual remembrance that we do in Hampton, Virginia, called Sankofa's International Day of Remembrance, that we do every June, along with Charleston and New York and all the other places where we celebrate. But the burial ground was pivotal to my entire life. I have not stopped since I began working for the ancestors in like 92. And I continue to do that every day.
Linda, can we get an overview of your background? So talk to us about who Toni Cade Bambara is, and what is her influence? What has she done and how did you become her biographer? But tell us who she is. A lot of people don't know. She's kind of, a lot of people don't know who she is, and she's so important and so major. But just, give our viewers a lot of information about Toni Cade Bambara.
Yeah, so...
and I heard you say that you were her student, which I don't think I remembered that. So that's interesting too, yeah.
Yeah, actually, I was thinking as Chadra was talking, I know Chadra because of our interest in Toni Cade Bambara.
Yes.
I just happened to be listening to her on the radio talking about Sankofa and their honoring of Toni Cade Bambara as a part of their ceremonies. And I had just moved to Hampton or Portsmouth at that time from New Jersey. And I was like, well, who is this sister on the radio talking about Toni Cade Bambara? Because like you said, Deborah, there aren't too many people, even now, celebrating the life and work of Toni Cade Bambara. So I reached out to Chadra, and the rest is sisterhood history, right?
Yes.
And Deborah, our relationship comes also through Toni Cade Bambara, because Chadra introduced me to you, and then you invited me to Charleston to talk about the book that I did, A Joyous Revolt, the first biography on Toni Cade Bambara.
Right, because in fact, let me just say this, and we'll talk about this a little bit more. In fact, it's Toni Cade Bambara's quote from 1987 that is the actual inspiration for Remembrance that started in Brooklyn, in the manner that we do it.
Right.
So that's kind of how this whole thing began. So we'll deal with that a little bit, because I'm going to want either one of you to read that quote. But if you can continue a little bit more about who is Toni Cade Bambara.
Yeah, and I was mentioning to Chadra, there's another quote that I would like to read also from The Salt Eaters, where she's talking about, that's her novel, The Salt Eaters, where she's talking about remembrance. But Toni Cade Bambara, she was born in 1939, grew up in Harlem, very much influenced by her Harlem experience. But I met her when she was teaching at Livingston College, which was the newly opened branch of Rutgers University in 1970. And Livingston College was being kind of like, we were all excited about Livingston because it was breaking away, and it was a response to the Black student movement at the time. I mean, we were demanding more Black faculty, we were demanding more Black courses. And one of the efforts that Rutgers was making to address some of those demands was opening up Livingston and having a very strong curriculum that expressed African-American history, African-American writers. And so Toni Cade Bambara was a part of that initial faculty that came to Livingston. And she, prior to that, was at City College. And also there's a real vanguard of activist writers like Audre Lorde and James Jordan, and it's quite a long roll call. But they're both at City College and at Livingston, Toni likes to refer to herself as a cultural worker. They were much more than teachers, quote, like professors or academics or locked into the ivory tower. Toni was in the vanguard of those folks at Livingston who were very much into making a connection between what we were doing in the classroom to what we were doing in the community. So for example, anything that was an assignment in her class, the first assignment might be, you know, to write a short story or to do an essay, but then she would say the second part of the assignment is, how are you going to bring that to the community? And so I recall writing a short story. The assignment was, how can we take these white Europeanized fairy tales and make them something that relates to our children? And so I did this story called The True Story of Chicken Licken. And the true story of Chicken Licken was that Chicken Licken was, it wasn't the sky that fell on her head. It was a policeman, a cop, who hit her over the head with his weapon. We call it his weapon, right? And then Chicken Licken, as I renamed her, had organized a protest march. And they went to protest protest police brutality, essentially. So that was my rewriting of the story. But Toni Cade Bambara was the kind of teacher, so that not only was I being asked, okay, you're going to go to the Black Liberation School? Are you going to take it to if you're in church? Are you going to read this story in Sunday school? What are you going to do with this work? I mean, it doesn't matter if I read it and I give you an A or B. What matters is that you take it back to the community. So not only on that particular, as an example of the kind of person Toni is, not only did I have the marching order, so to speak, to not lock myself into the grade in the academy, but to return to the community, but Toni, in her book, which was only, it's called Tales and Stories for Black Folks, which is right here, I think, somewhere. It's out of so I was a junior in college, right, when this book was organized, and she included in the book several students' works, including mine, who had done this exercise or this writing around transforming fairy tales into truth tales, right? And so she also did that in her first book, The Black Woman. And I should pause there to talk just a little bit about the importance of The Black Woman, which is her first book. The Black Woman came out in 1970. This was in the midst of the Black Cultural Revolution, which frequently had very defined roles about what the men did and what the women did. And Figure will remember this, Deborah will remember this. And, you know, it was like the women were supposed to be in the kitchen cooking the food and serving the men. And then it was this whole idea about, you know, like the birth control pill, you know, you should be having babies for the revolution. So all this was kind of, you know, bubbling up, but there was a silence around it, right? It was something that was talked about within the civil rights movement, but Toni actually brought that argument into the light of day in The Black Woman. And in this book, she also brought another idea, which is very central to her work, which is the idea of Pan-Africanism. I mean, she was truly an internationalist. I mean, she did work not only in communities here, but also, I mean, she did work in Cuba. She was very much involved with film workers, African film workers in Europe. She traveled to Vietnam. She spent time in Cambodia, and she brought with her, she traveled with a feminist health group from California. She was very expansive in her view, but Black people were the center of her work. I mean, there is no question about that. Her base was the Black community. Her voices that she included in her books came from the Black community. And this idea of organizing a ceremony around remembrance was very much about her work in the community of folks of African descent. So The Black Woman, and then the other book that that was a total hit was Gorilla My Love, right? It's a book of short stories. And what is important about that book is that many of the characters in the book are young girls. And when you think about the male writers of that period, you don't hear the voices of young girls in their stories. And I remember when I was working on the biography that I did later on Toni Cade Bambara, I was reading some of the letters that came to her and when she was working, and one of them came from children who were in school in Orange, New Jersey, right, the town next door to where I lived, writing her, like all the kids are writing her, they were like, we see kids like ourselves in these stories, and so at that time, that was also revolutionary, right? Because we were reading Dick and Jane when I was growing up. We know it was like all white. There were no black faces, right, in those books. But I think, and I could go on and on about Toni, but I think what's really important about Toni is that Toni, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's taking a while. There's a new book, another book coming out about Toni's work, Black People Are My Work, in the fall. But Toni did not focus on celebrating herself or celebrating her work or bringing the spotlight to herself. She focused on community and she focused on the work of others. The list of people, Aisha Saida Simmons, Nikki Finney, Louis Messiah. I mean, there are just students who started Black liberation schools. And one of the reasons it took so long to write the book is because there are just so many current activists and cultural workers who say it was Toni Cade Bambara, who they weren't, when they met her, it wasn't thinking about what she wrote. She was thinking about what they were writing, what kind of dance performances, what kind of poetry, what kind of, how are they bringing cultural work into the world? And so I'm going to stop there, but I got to know Toni when I was at Livingston College. And when she died in 1996, I had spent some time with her, over the years. And we did a celebration of her life at Butler's of a small group of people. Her mother was there, her daughter Kama was there. And Jan Carew, who's also a wonderful friend and scholar who's no longer living, said to me, he was my teacher also at Livingston, said to me, well, what are you going to do with all these, tributes and papers and scholarly works of people talking about Toni's work? And I said, I don't know. And he said, well, did you take my class? He said, you have a responsibility now to bring this work together and to, archive it, read a book. And that was the beginning of the Toni Cade Bambara work.
And what's the name of that book that you did?
The book is called A Joyous Revolt. And I really wanted to emphasize this. I don't know how to make this show. I really wanted there's Toni. And this is Sue Ross, who's a wonderful photographer, is responsible for this incredible image and many images of Toni that are in the book. Toni would talk about revolution being irresistible. She would talk about cultural work as being delicious. She would talk about the joy around creating change and being fierce, right? I mean, it had nothing to do with not like standing up for yourself and being fierce and fiery, but it wasn't designed to burn you out and make you weak, right? It was like, this work is supposed to give you new energy to continue in this program, right? So yeah, A Joyous Revolt is the title of the book, and it is available on Amazon.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Chadra, can you, so now that we've heard about Toni Cade Bambara, talk about her and the piece you did as mother of the movement. And I put in there Remembrance movement because your piece was more broad. You spoke about mothers of the movement as especially coming out of the passage. But yeah, so we can talk about both of those areas.
Okay. So
and I would definitely want one of you to read the piece. So
sure.
Get to that.
Yeah, I have it on I have it here. I could read or Linda can read it. So, the first book that I read of Toni Cade Bambara, let me just say this, was The Black Woman. And up until that point, I was an African American Studies minor. Well, I considered it a major, but we used to say major minor because it wasn't a major at the school. But it was major to me. And so, but all the work that I was doing was around Black men. I kept hearing the names of Black men and Black scholars and Langston and Du Bois and, you know, all of these, you know, Richard Wright, Baldwin, who is like my spiritual father, all of these men, which was wonderful, but I was yearning for a connection to something centered on the woman. And so I read The Black Woman and was transformed, was completely transformed by the book. And one of the things that I loved about Toni Cade Bambara, for me, was the fact that she spoke about the fact that I could do both. I could be, you know, so Du Bois had this notion of the double consciousness, right? We're living two warring bodies. You know, we're looking at through a lens of white America. We're looking through a lens of Black America. Well, as a Black woman, I got the white world I'm looking through to navigate and stay safe and alive. I have a Black world that I'm existing in. And then I also have a lane that is my woman lane, my girl lane, my girl child lane, right? What do I do with that? And up until that point, I felt like I had to choose. Like I couldn't be, people would have me pit the race against gender. And I didn't want to have to choose. And Toni was the one who taught me that I didn't have to choose. And there's a quote that she has where she says, revolution for self was about the whole person. So this notion of wholeness was essential. And through that, I found myself. Incidentally, she wrote that book in 1970 was a good year. Some good babies were born in that year, and I'll just leave it at that. But anyway, yes. So just to show you the connection of how this works, Linda and I connected. She's writing a book on Toni Cade Bambara. I'm doing Remembrance Ceremonies. And so through our relationship, Toni's 75th birthday was coming up. And Linda, now how did this go, Linda? Did you contact me or did Aisha contact you, and then you put her in contact with me? Aisha is one of the editors of the associate editor of the Feminist Wire, which is a great online publication, and she was also a student of Toni Cade Bambara, right? So Linda, how did that happen? Because, and then I'll explain, if that's okay, how everything else happened. Because I think that just speaks volumes to Toni working her way from the ancestral realm.
Yes, and continuing to work her way through the ancestral
Absolutely.
realm, right? As we sit here today. I don't remember the connections. I just want to say that, you know, another area that's very important to Toni's work, of course, is the film, right? And so Aisha Shahida Simmons, she, you know, again, creating collectivity, like they formed this group called Image Weavers, right? So it was not just celebration of the individual, but celebrating the collective. And I think what Chadra is saying, and I think what folks need to understand more, is that the story that Chadra is telling, the story that I am telling, they are countless numbers of Black women who were part of the project that Aisha was involved with the Black Feminist Wire. Louis Messiah is currently working on a documentary on Toni Cade Bambara, and it's taken them like really a long time because there are just so many lives, women, sisters, and brothers that she has touched to continue to do the cultural work.
Right.
But I don't remember the details either right now at the moment.
Yeah, I think because she's connected to you, she contacted you about the 75th anniversary and how we could honor her, and you connected her to me, and I got an email saying, hey, would you write this article? So just a shout out to Aisha for her work and her brilliant documentary. She has a film called No, and it's about rape. So that's another powerful sister. But anyway, she invited me to write the piece. And so the piece, it was in 2014 I wrote the piece. And I actually have a piece in here that I just want to read from. This is a book that at the burial ground, Deborah told me about. It's Armagh. It's really kind of beat up, but that means I just love this book. And it's called 2000 Seasons. And this is why I want to read this, because it speaks specifically to why Toni is the mother of the movement. So in the book, he says, and this was written in 1973.
And he is a Ghanaian writer.
Did I tell you I met him? I don't know I did, but we'll have to talk. I met him in Senegal, but we'll talk about that later. Yeah.
Oh my God, that's a whole nother story. Wow. Okay. So out of 2,000 seasons, he says, Armand says, remembrance has not escaped us. Trapped now in our smallest self, we repositories of the remembrance of the way violated. We, the people of the way, trapped now in our smallest self, that is our vocation, to find our larger healing self. We, the Black people. And then further down, he says that it was left up to the women to begin the work of the healing. And when I read that in Armand's book before writing this piece in The Feminist Wire, I was like, oh my God, he is talking about Toni Cade, because remembrance, the ceremony itself, is about healing from the wounds and the scars of enslavement. Because clearly we carry the blood of our ancestors. It runs through our veins. It is, we are here because of them, right? Had they not lived, we would not be here. So the fact that he wrote that it was left up to the women to begin the healing really spoke volumes to me. The quote that's by Toni Cade, which she read at a storytellers conference, and that happened in 1987. She was at Medgar Evers College at a storytellers conference, and she read this quote. Linda, do you have it up? Do you want to read it together or read parts of it?
I don't think go ahead and read it. I don't have it.
Okay. So I'll just read it. So she was at a storytellers conference at Medgar Evers College. For those who don't know, because I know this is international, Akua is doing it international. That's in Brooklyn, New York, Medgar Evers College. And Toni Cade Bambara said this. She said, I know we must reclaim those bones in the Atlantic Ocean. Do you know that there is not a plaque, a memorial, a day, a ritual, or an hour that is erected in memory to those 100 million bodies in the Atlantic Ocean? All those African bones in the briny deep. All those people who said no and jumped ship. All those people who tried to figure a way to steer, to navigate amongst the sharks. We don't call upon that power. We don't call upon those spirits. We don't celebrate those ancestors. We don't have a marker, an expression, a song that we use to acknowledge them. We have nothing to indicate that those are our people. And they mattered. We willingly self-administer knockout drops. More horrendous is the fact that we don't tap into the ancestral presence in the waters. Ashe, Toni Cade Bambara. So she said those words at a storytellers conference in 1987. In 1989, Dr. Mary Umolo and Brother Tony Akeem of the People of the Sun Collective got together, and they had their first tribute to the ancestors at Coney Island. And from that tribute, you know, I believe, Deborah, I think Charleston was next. Am I correct? That Charleston was the next?
That's correct.
To form a remembrance ceremony. And really the name Remembrance, I gotta give credit where credit is due now. You know, there are many names that we call these tributes to the ancestors. We call, in Swahili, it's Maafa. You know, it's a terrible occurrence. We call them tributes to the ancestors, right? Ancestral Day. We have a lot of different names. But Remembrance was a name that Deborah pushed for and actually called her ceremony in South Carolina Remembrance. And, you know, we have to, again, another mother of a movement, right? And so I came down to South Carolina when Deborah moved there, watched her do the ceremony, was so moved. And I had been to Coney Island. Then I came to South Carolina, saw her do the ceremony, was so moved I decided I wanted to do one in Hampton because of the history of Hampton, Virginia being the bookends of the African American experience as it relates to enslavement, because we know that Africans existed in the Americas prior to enslavement. You know, Ivan Van Sertima told us that, right? They came before Columbus. We came before Columbus. But I wanted to do one in Hampton, Virginia. And Deborah said, I'll come. Deborah came down from South Carolina, came up to Virginia, and she helped me orchestrate the Remembrance Ceremony and gave me all the pointers of what to do and how to do. And so, you know, it has grown tremendously. This movement that started from, you know, her mouth, right? She gave voice to a call. I say she put out a call out there into the community. You know, that's part of her activism. She put that call out and said, we need to honor these ancestors. I refer to these ancestors as the Africans that the world forgot, because everyone remembers what happened during slavery. They know that a ship came, loaded Africans. They were dropped off in the Caribbean and the United States and Europe and all these places. But no one talks about what happened during the middle. No one talks about those that fought back and resisted a life of enslavement, those who jumped, as she said, into the shark-infested waters, that drowned, those who were healthy and were thrown into the Atlantic Ocean because they were running out of food or because they were the resistors. You know, the lie that they tell us, or the lie that has been told, is that Africans did not resist. We have always resisted the oppressive forces. We resisted on the shores of Africa. We resisted on the ships. We resisted coming off of the ships, and we're still resisting, looking at what is happening with these current situations of Black people dying at the hands of racial terror, is what I call it. So we've always resisted. But yes, it goes back to the mothers of the movement. And the piece was in 2014, and it was called Mothers of the Movement, Remembering Bambara and the African Bones of the Briny Deep. So major thanks to Linda for connecting me to Aisha, and for Aisha allowing me to share in that article.
And thanks to Toni Cade Bambara for connecting me to Chadra, who connected me to Deborah and allowing me to share today. Yeah. And so one of the things that my first Sankofa ceremonies were actually that I attended were here in Hampton, Chadra. And so one of the things that I wasn't expecting, but I think is so powerful about your ceremonies, is every ceremony that I've attended, it's not just about the past. It is very much about the present, and even more importantly about the future. You know, we're in the midst of the another trauma in terms of, you know, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and your ceremonies never ever forget those who are sacrificing their lives now because of racism,
right?
Because of terrorism. You know, I've done work around health disparities, right? And so that people act like health disparities is something new. Toni Cade used to always talk about, what are we pretending not to know today, right? So a lot of folks are pretending that this idea of health disparities is a new idea,
right?
But what I think is wonderful about Remembrance, specifically Remembrance in Hampton, what Deborah's doing is seeing this circle, right? Seeing continuation, seeing past, seeing future, being in present, being in the moment, but just a very, very, very expansive idea. And I know Toni Cade Bambara, I know her well enough to say that Toni Cade Bambara is with us in spirit, but she would definitely be with you and with Deborah in person at the ceremonies.
No, that you know, for someone who digs up the past, right? I often am not blessed to know the people who I admire. And so it's like through Linda, I'm able to get these glimpses of who Toni Cade Bambara was and is. And that's really powerful. And yes, you know, for me, you know, this whole notion of Sankofa, since it's, right? So Sankofa is an Adinkra symbol out of West Africa, the Côte d'Ivoire, right, in Ghana. It teaches us that in order to know where you're going, the feet are pointing forward. You have to know where you've come from. The head of the bird is at the back, and this egg is representative of the future. So Sankofa, and I named my organization the Sankofa Projects because of my work at the African burial ground. We found metal tacks that were on top of one of the coffins that we began to refer to that person as the Sankofa man. And we realized through that although we had been through so much, through slavery, through the Middle Passage, that we had not lost our culture. We brought our culture here with us. And so for me, it's very important as we tap into the spirituality and the libations and the dancing and the drumming and all these cultural components, which I think are crucial. It's also important at every remembrance that we talk about the current day issues. Nina Simone once said that it is a responsibility of the artist to reflect the time, to use the platform to reflect the times. And for me, when we gather at Buckrow Beach in Hampton, and we have that space, we have that ground, with that circle, there's no beginning, no end. It's like the ring shout. Remember Deborah at the burial ground? You know, we have this circle where we are gathered. We do a Black Lives Matter tribute every year. We call the names. We call Trayvon Martin. We call Sandra Bland. We call Amadou Diallo. We call Breonna Taylor. We call Ahmaud Arbery. We call everyone who has passed, because we know that the connection between what has happened in the past to our ancestors, the disrespect, the disregard for Black lives, we know that our lives matter. The problem is that those who are in power, we have these institutions which don't recognize us, which don't see our value. They don't see our humanity. Malcolm X had written a piece when he got back from Mecca. It's in the Egyptian Gazette. I think it was in 1964. And he talks about the humanity, that America does not recognize Black people's humanity. And so it has to change. We also talk about domestic violence. And I remember someone saying to me, well, I got an email from someone actually, and it was a woman, surprisingly, who wrote me and said, why are you talking about domestic violence? Why don't you keep the program to keep talking about slavery, but I don't think you should talk about domestic violence, you know? And when we have, what I typically do is so my work is rooted, like I said, also in anti-rape culture, female genital mutilation, all these things around women, around being whole, and protecting women. She said, well, why are you doing this? You know, this is remembrance. You should be talking about history and slavery. And I wrote the woman, and she was an elder, and so I wanted to speak respectfully. But I told her, I said, you know, this is the platform to discuss it. My work is around anti-violence and anti-rape. Do you not think that during slavery, was it not violent? Were women and men not raped? Right? So it's always relevant to talk about these things, because what I know statistically is that when we're sitting at remembrance, 1 out of 3 of the women that are there have been sexually assaulted, or are going to be sexually assaulted, or are living in a domestic violence situation and going home to someone who's abusing them. So it is, to me, imperative to talk about the past, plan for the future, acknowledge the present atrocities that we're dealing with. We absolutely have to remind them, the powers that be, that our lives matter. And remembrance, I find, is the best time to do it. You have a captive audience. They're excited to be there to talk about the ancestors, and also it draws the connection from the past to the present, that not much has changed. Not much has changed. The same laws that were enacted, the Virginia slave codes, and I'm only saying slave because that's what it's called on the actual document. I would call it the Virginia Enslaved Code. But those codes talked about Africans couldn't be educated. We couldn't commune. We couldn't get together. The only time, and this is the thing, the only time we were allowed to gather is when we were burying our dead. That's the time they allowed us to gather. And I think that's powerful. that to us.
Chadra, in the article you mentioned, which I thought was so, interesting the way you did it, of midwives of the diaspora. And I want Linda to talk to us about her work on midwives of the diaspora, and then draw it together, tie it up with remembrance and the way that you did in the article. So Linda, if you want to,
okay.
I don't.
Do you want me to? I wrote it out because it says we. Do you want me to read that piece where I speak about midwives?
Yes, and then let Linda talk about her work on midwives of the diaspora. If you can read your piece first, and then
Okay. It was a harsh time, a horrid time filled with pain. Hearts and minds remember what textbooks do not convey. We came before Columbus. We women remember the bloodshed from the woodshed, from the shores of Fort Elmina to Fort Monroe. We resisted the violations, the forced penetration, the brutality of enslavement at every turn. From the drum calls in Stono to the marches in Montgomery, across the Combahee River, courageous women and men making their way from the Congo to the dismal swamp, navigating dogs and snakes, chasing nightfall, going underground. These truth tellers and cultural workers, Ashe, that's Toni, and warriors were leading their people back to themselves and to each other and to freedom, risking it all in the name of love and truth and justice and equality. To those who never made it off the enslavement ships alive, women cutting down the strange fruit from the southern trees, honoring the dead along the way, burying the dead along the way, birthing babies and ideas, picking cotton and cane, these midwives of the Middle Passage, forced to feed the nation her milk while her children lay hungry. These are the mothers of the movement.
Okay. Linda, yes.
Yeah. Gosh, there's so many things that are kind of like running through my mind right now. So one of the things that I think about when I was thinking about before Chadra read, and I will talk about that as well, but I was thinking about the importance of Sankofa, and this actually does link to midwives, as healing, right? As ritual ceremonies that bring us together and look towards wellness. That's one of the things that Toni Cade Bambara is focusing on in her book, The Salt Eaters. Do you really want to be well?
Yes.
So, and it's hard work being well, particularly, in this context that we're in with the, chauvinism, racism, and all of that. But the incredible truth and amazing truth is that we are here, right? It's just like, it's just like, it's amazing that we are here. And so midwives have a lot to do with that, I think. And women have a lot to do with that. Our communities have a lot to do with that. But in very specific ways, traditional African midwives have contributed to our ongoing, we are still here in our communities and doing the work, right? So about a year ago, I went to Ghana and Ethiopia and Kenya to collect stories from traditional midwives on the continent. And the reason the idea came to do that was because when I was talking to midwives, the last generation of traditional midwives who were essentially forced out of practice by laws in the 1970s, where it was decided that everybody needed to have their baby in a hospital, essentially with a white doctor, given the statistics, that's what it is. But anyway, so the midwives that I talked to in Alabama back in 1981, they passed that law in 1976, talked about their skills, talked about managing in difficult situations, talked about their grandmothers who were enslaved, talked about, all the white babies that African midwives attended, mothers in Virginia and across the South and across the United States. Just real, important folks, not only in our community, but in the community, across color. So, but one of the things that they talked a lot about was these traditions, and I called them traditions, but they would just say, well, this is what my grandmother said we should do, or my grandmother would do something like on a certain day, and it usually was the 7th day or the 8th day or the 9th day, you would come back and you would take the infant out and you would walk around the house 3 times and you might sing a song and you might sprinkle water. They also talk, and I said, oh my goodness, that sounds like a ritual. And then I would start talking to midwives who were working on the continent, and they said, oh, that's very familiar, because that's what traditional midwives who are now being called traditional birth attendants, I like to call these women, are ritual specialists, are traditional midwives, but they were doing very similar things. The other thing, just as another example, that the midwives in Alabama were talking about was the importance of being able to take alternative birthing positions, right? And I'm just thinking about that now conceptually, taking alternative birthing positions, right? So instead of being flat on your back, right, where you really don't, you're not working with gravity, it just doesn't make, it doesn't make scientific sense either. But the traditional birthing position in Africa and in most indigenous communities is not flat on your back. It's either kneeling or stooping. So the problem was that one of the ways that they justified getting rid of traditional African American midwives was to say, oh, these women are backward, they're stupid, they're superstitious, their practices are unscientific. And so I really wanted to go to the continent to talk to women who remembered their practices and their grandmother's practices, to understand whether, in fact, these midwives that I talked to were, in fact, tradition bearers of African culture. And in fact, I'm working now, and I'm writing, and I'm going through their stories. In fact, these women are reflecting the practices that survived the Middle Passage, right?
Right.
So everything that they have intended to do, including wiping out those last generation of midwives in Alabama, to literally, the Middle Passage, this our strength, and this is like what we celebrate. Like we can be. I mean, it's so important to continue to celebrate and recognize our power and our strength, because there's so much more work to do. And without that strength and without that power, it becomes impossible to do the work. And again, just to refer to Toni Cade Bambara, I mean, she did the work around in Atlanta with the murder of the children, and that was her last book that she did. But it was always to do the self-care, collect the stories, and don't allow the racism and the terrorism that still persists keep us from doing the work.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, with that, I just want to say that, this notion of, I love what you said about collecting the stories, and the importance of collecting the stories, because, as we know that, some ancestors here. So ancestor Octavia Butler, when she first got into what we now call Afrofuturism, right? Sci-fi writer. One of the things that she said in an interview, I think back in 2000, it might have been, she was in an interview with Charles Rose, and he asked her about her writing. Why did she write, and why did she pick the subjects? And she said she had to write herself in. She didn't see herself, right? So the onus is on us to write ourselves in, whether that's about, Black midwives and the importance the Black midwives hold in our culture. It is up to us to tell these stories, and so that these stories will live on beyond us, right? Audrey told us, Audrey Lorde, Queen Mother, Ashe, said that our silence will not protect us. So it is imperative that we continue to speak out against, yes, the injustices, the racism, the homophobia, the classism, the poverty, the homelessness, all of these things which are plaguing us. Anytime these isms or these phobias are creating a separation between humans, between human beings, which doesn't allow that officer to understand that there is a living and breathing person underneath his knee. How many times,
Mm-hmm.
from Eric Garner to Rakaya Boyd to Eleanor Bumpers, to the countless names, to the places where there's no video.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of people that are going through that same thing where there was no video.
Mm-hmm.
They were called out for their mothers,
Mm-hmm.
the mothers of the movement, right? The mothers, calling out to the mothers.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll leave it with this and just say, you know, Zora told us, Ancestor Zora Neale Hurston told us that if we are silent about our pain, they will kill us and they will say we enjoyed it. So for me, remembrance is about the reckoning. It is about looking in the face at the ugly of what racism and inhumanity has been. And it is about telling those difficult stories. It is about celebrating our culture. It is about participating in ritual. It is about birthing ideas. It is about inspiring our children and protecting our elders. We don't need to throw them away. I don't know who we are as a people right now, the way we're discarding our elders. But we need to take the collective, the whole person, as Toni Cade said. We need to take care of our whole person, but our collective community we need to take care of. Because really we are at a time that we have seen before. You know, people are saying, oh, we haven't seen a time like this before. Oh, no, we have. Black people have been, somebody said, oh, about the lockdown, and well, you know, and not to even call it a lockdown, because Sister Angela Davis said, this is a lockdown. You are being asked to stay home so you can be safe. A lockdown is what happens in prison. That's a lockdown, because you can still leave your house if you want to. So what we are doing during this time is, you know, staying safe. We've seen this kind of thing before, not to this extent, clearly, right? Over 100,000 people have perished due to COVID. We are disproportionately affected by that. Those disparities didn't happen just yesterday. As Linda was saying, Linda's done work in health for many years. We know that these kinds of disparities happen because you're able to trace people who have diabetes today or who have conditions today. We know from the African burial ground there were nutritional deficiencies that happened during slavery. That middle passage, 5 to 12 weeks at the bottom of a ship, chained next to each other, one next to each other, breathing in excrement and urine, right? No fresh air. That has an impact on who we are today. So, I don't know. I just feel like, you know, the time is now. The time is now to honor our ancestors, to remember the work is important. And for me, as an anti-colonial, pro-Black, womanist, feminist, intersectional feminist, you know, I just feel like, you know, there's parts for all of us. There's a part here for my Blackness, as well as for me as a woman. You know, there's space for both. And in this work and in honoring Toni with Remembrance, this is what we're doing. We are honoring, you know, these mothers who have paved the way.
Okay, thank you so much. Linda, do you have any parting words?
I don't have any parting words. I just, I'm very grateful to Deborah. Was this your idea? I mean,
well,
Deborah, I'm grateful to Chadra for bringing us together. I mean, this is, and I'm also, I mean, one of the incredible things that's going on around this time is that voices are being connected in new ways. And so, so now we are through technology. There's a world that can experience these ceremonies as we move towards this very, very special time, and carry the energy. And also, one other thing, I guess, from Toni is to make sure that as we do the work, that we also take the time to rest.
Right, and that's a good point. And Brenda, Brenda is Brenda's idea, and you know, and she is our person that's our everything person for remembrance. So we're so grateful. So Brenda, do you have something? Because I mean, that rest part, I know, you know, resonated with you.
I'm just in awe. I am in awe of I get to sit here as a participant, as someone who just showed up at Middle Passage Remembrance. I think I got a peek of it in Brooklyn for a moment, but we went there under the guise of going with my Yoruba house. So it was looked at differently. Because it's not unless you're in certain paths that you tend to end up at the waters. So this wider measure of being able to say to regular people who don't normally wear white clothes, who don't normally beat the drum, who don't normally take time to leave a plate of food out, leave a glass of water out, smoke a cigar, that, hey, you know you belong here as well. And in looking at, because it involves so many of us who were dropped off all along the ways, even here in Charleston, I get to see the works that Deborah has done and Osei has done, as the growth of it, the diversity of it, the importance of the different stories at the various ports. That's why it's never just, okay, show what happened in Charleston. I want to see what went down in Virginia. I want to see footage from Licken. I want to see how you're doing what you do. And this might be one of the few years where everyone has to show how they've been bringing it forth. And I thank each of you, because I couldn't have got this in nobody's college class. Not like this. Not how you just served it. And between the three of y'all, I'm grateful that I just get to sit in the cut.
Well, thank you.
I honestly, this has been so. I thank you, Akua, for being. She has always been the one to bring people together. And Linda and I often laugh because we've been trying to connect for a minute and hadn't connected. And I said, look at this. Deborah's in South Carolina bringing us together again. So I just appreciate you, Brenda. I appreciate you, Deborah. I appreciate you, Linda. And I just want to, if I can, is it okay, Deborah, if I say one more thing?
Yes.
Okay, so I think it's kind of interesting. I think it's really prophetic. Today's May 29th, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, so on May 29th, 1851, because I like my Black history dates, right? On May 29th, 1951, this was the day, 1851, May 29th, this was the day that Sojourner Truth was in Akron, Ohio, and she gave her Ain't I a Woman speech.
Hello.
On today. So I think there's something very significant about Deborah and Brenda and Linda and me being together talking about Toni Cade Bambara and lifting the names of these other women when she said those words, about plowing and planting and gathering the food, and ain't I a woman? She bore 13 children and seen most of them sold off into slavery. Ain't I a woman? So I came across that and I said, oh my God, that was meant to happen. This was meant to happen on this day for that purpose. So I shade a Sojourner Truth as well.
Thank you so much. That is definitely a very powerful addition to this whole piece. Brenda, do you have anything else?
I've been blessed, and I hope our viewers will be blessed as I've been blessed. It's amazing. Thank you. Madupwe. Thank you. Just yes. Get it. Now see, you have to come with all the verbs, because the sister's going to be coming for this one.
Yes. Thank you both so much. And so we're going to let you both go, but did you want to, are there any projects that you wanted to mention before we sign off that you're working on that
Linda?
the public needs to know?
Right now, I'm really very much listening to the voices of the traditional midwives that I interviewed. And it is it's just an incredible gift that I received. There was a welcoming, there was an honoring that I received. They expressed so much gratitude to the fact that I was recording their stories. And that's pretty much where my heart is right now. I have been doing a little bit of work on honoring Sister Retta Joyner Jones, who I found out about in Portsmouth, lived there 150 years ago, another untold story, saying in Africa as well as in the Caribbean, but really just kind of lost in history. So I've been giving that story some attention. But my mind and my spirit right now are very much with the traditional midwives in Africa.
Linda, quick question. Are you doing just audio recordings or audio and video?
I only had the ability to do audio when I was there, but it would be wonderful to do video in the future. So maybe we can talk about that.
Listen, I'm always ready.
That's right. That Toni Cade Bambara is speaking to us. Toni would definitely be like, well, where's the visual?
Okay. Yeah, that's you two should have that conversation.
I've gotten to progress. It used to be just pictures, and then I moved to Charleston, and that technology caught up with my needs because there are certain physical issues. But technology caught up with my needs, and in Charleston, here I was able to do. Oh, wait a second, videos here. And digital photography changed the whole scope of what there was to document. I'd never been here. I'm British born of Jamaican heritage, living in the Low Country. It is my estimation, while we're connecting the dots across the diaspora, that I'm visiting with my cousins in the diaspora. Because I was raised in Jamaica the 7 of 14. So coming here that was the closest I could get to, in my estimation, the motherland, or in looking at the level of spirit work that is actually done here, but not so-called done. No one thinks they're doing it, but they're working them well and working them heavily.
I would love to have the conversation. We absolutely should do that. Deborah will make sure it happens.
Yes,
right.
Yes.
A cool will connect.
This has been the moment, as they say. We had an Ia moment come together in a Kung Pung St. Elizabeth. We've had an Ia moment come together virtually from virtual Sankofa, the 23rd annual Charleston Middle Passage Remembrance, and we get to bring the mothers to you. But because I know how I get to edit and cut, free for all for the next moment, ladies. Talk to me about today.
Well, can I say something else that could be a part of the clip? Okay, I need to say this. One of the things that we do at Remembrance in Hampton, Virginia, is we walk around the tree. Okay, the Tree of Remembrance. And you can see behind me here, there's a tree.
Yeah.
This is another tree that I use in my work. So the tree is incredibly significant because when Africans were being loaded onto the enslavement ships, the enslavers had them walk around a tree. Women and children 7 times, men had to walk around it 9 times, and it was called the Tree of Forgetfulness. And the hope was that Africans would forget who they were. They wanted to disconnect them from Africa. So for the past 8 years at Buckrow Beach in Hampton, we have been walking around our tree of remembrance because we have not forgotten our ancestors. In 2008, I got a phone call from a friend of mine that said, I'm at Buckrow Beach and I don't see the tree. I think they cut it down. And so I was out of town. When I went to the site, I was horrified to see that our tree was cut to the root. Now, this is a ceremony that we've been doing in that area for 8 years. We, hundreds, gather, walk around that Tree of Remembrance, and it's been cut. So one of the initiatives that I've been working on since 2018 is a tree replanting or some kind of project that will create some kind of memorial to that space to honor the Tree of Remembrance, because I think it was, in my opinion, I talked to the city and I talked to people who lived in the community. I get different stories. Some say it was sick, the tree was sick. It was perfectly healthy. Others say that it was blocking the vision of the beach for the people who live there. And I think personally, they just didn't want hundreds of us showing up, drumming and dancing and pouring libations and walking around a tree talking about slavery. So they've cut down the tree. So what we're working on now is some kind of project. It's a tree replanting project. I don't know if it's going to be an actual physical tree or maybe a metal tree, but that is next. That is next for the Sankofa Projects. We want something in that spot to acknowledge the ceremony that we've been doing there for 8 years. Because as I say, they can cut the tree, but the root remains. Kind of like with us, right? They can take us out of Africa, but we're still connected to our homeland. So I'll keep you posted through the Sankofa Projects about.
And they don't understand. Tree roots got issues. It's one of the most powerful things you can expose to us.
Yep.
Lots of work can be done there.
Yeah.
It's 2020, May 29th. Let me put everybody back on the screen here. We know what today's headlines say. This will go up in just about 2 weeks. What do we, I had seen various articles about Black mothers in grief. And then I went searching for articles on Black fathers in grief, and they're not too many. And the Shakur Francis, who is of the Charleston area, but a pastor to 2 predominantly white congregations upstate South Carolina, recounts the story of having been with a group of people, six were white, and a 70-plus-year-old white woman called him the N name. And he said one part of him wanted to just react, but he's got the whole forth. And he said what the others didn't get was that their silence at that time, and she was armed with the fact that nobody else would say something. But in listening to his video, he said Black lives matter, but Black feelings matter too. And the amount of time that I may spend being horrified and traumatized just trying to scroll through social media, regardless of platform. And yes, I'm sensitive. I'm Pisces. I'm Black. I'm daughter of, niece of, aunt of, sister of. I came in the world with 5 brothers. Our family ended up with 12 daughters. The males that came in after 58, the one that came in, he was murdered by the time he was 3. This unrelenting continual pain and the display of death that we're supposed to be desensitized to, which my spirit cannot. There's a continual outrage, and it's not just in America, it's across the diaspora in ways and shapes and flows because of lack of communication between us at a one-on-one. We only happen to know about by an obscure article. Y'all are elders. I ain't got the way y'all got yet. Give us something. What have your lives taught you about coming through these moments? How do we help folks make it through? Even in the midst of 100,000 dead, and we don't even really know who did yet.
Right. Linda?
No.
I'm not, I mean, I can't, I just joined the club, the 50 club, so I'm
as I was listening, I can only just reflect on maybe how I'm trying to get through, and I'm sure you're also doing some things to get through. So I also think a lot of times we always think the answer is going to come from someone else, right? But I can see that you're a wise woman, a wise person, and that deep within, I think you also have some answers. And, you know, I think it's a myth to think that the elders have all the answers, because I don't think we have all the answers. But I think that the thing, I mean, you know, that there are battles, and some battles are really, really hard. And I think that we have to understand, you know, which battles we can participate in.
Right.
And also we have to understand, I mean, there's one thing that, like, I just have to sometimes completely let go of Facebook and the internet and all of that, because it's just too much for me at this point in my life. Because I do have to have time to restore, because I won't be able to do the work that I'm called to do. And also, I think for you to honor the work that you're doing, because I mean, you're here now, but you are doing work. I mean, there was one point in my life when I thought collecting stories wasn't doing really, like, I wasn't on the, I mean, like in the 70s, like if you weren't a part of the Black Panther Party, or if you weren't in the, you know, if you didn't have your gun ready to go shoot up some folks, like, are you really revolutionary, right? So I think that we have to be really expansive in thinking about how we can contribute to creating a more holistic world in place. And I think the hardest thing, Toni did talk about being eternally optimistic, which I don't say that I'm eternally optimistic, but sometimes it's good to say it, right? Because I think if we don't believe that another world is possible, it just certainly cannot come. I mean, that is just like, go get in the bed, put the cover over my heads, and just, I mean, why? Why get up if we have decided that everything is impossible? So, and it's work itself, just doing the work of feeling that I do have the energy. I mean, and also not labeling what you do as being not enough, right? So like for some folks, getting involved with the NAACP, like I might not think that's enough, but if that's what the work is for them, then, you know, doing that work. And and to remember always that in spite of everything, that there have been victories. We are not supposed to be here. They intended for us not to survive at all. And we're here and we're fighting and we're celebrating ourselves. And we're having Sankofa ceremonies. And also, you know, and collectivity. Like we're talking now, and we, you know, like a lot of times we say we can't just talk, but sometimes ceremony, conversation gives us the energy to keep going and keep moving. I'm impressed with the fallen now, the families who are able to actually, I was thinking, could I go before, I'm getting ready to cry now, but would I be able to go before a TV camera and call for action? I mean, these folks are, I'm going to stop there.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Oof.
Well, I'm not an elder, but I will just say that I absolutely co-sign everything you said. And I do think we have to remain optimistic during this time, because we've come through, as a people, we need to remember that we are resilient, that we are strong, that we are beautiful, that we have a purpose, that we belong here, that we were called for before our birth. And as James Baldwin said, our crowns have already been bought. All we have to do is put them on. So it's up to us to acknowledge that. And I love to tell people from an anthropological perspective, they got it all twisted with these pseudosciences. What we know for sure is that African men and African women, of whom we are the descendants, are the mothers and fathers of civilization. We are the kings and queens of humanity, if there is to be such, right? But we are the beginning, and we need to remember that, and we need to remind ourselves and each other of that. We need to be gentle with each other. We need to love on each other. And when we can hug again, we need to hug each other. And like I said, put on our crown, put on our gele, put on our feathers, wear our braids, you know, show up as we are, walk in our truth. You know, there will never be another you. To whoever's watching, there will never be another you to come through this earth. You're the only one. So whatever your gifts, whatever your talents, whatever that burning desire is that you get up in the middle of the night thinking about. And Brenda, you are brilliant with this digital stuff. You know, that is clearly a gift you have, you know. And we have to use our talents and let those sustain us, you know, whether it's cooking good food for someone or calling somebody during this time of this pandemic when we can't visit our people, checking in on them, making sure that people are okay. And you're right, Linda, you said about the numbers. Well, I think Brenda, you said about the numbers. Ida B. Wells says she don't trust the numbers because the murderers write the reports. I'm gonna leave that right there. So I just pray that we all remain safe through this and that we have a chance, hopefully in 2021, to get together. Hopefully before that, but if not, you know, at next year's Remembrance, we'll be able to see each other and hug each other and tell each other we love each other.
Ladies, I've got to do this to you because nobody else can really do it to her. Do each of you have a question for Deborah?
No,
yes.
No, nothing. No, nothing. Bam.
No,
I don't mess with the flow of my editing here. Ladies, you get one question each at Deborah Wright.
Okay, I'll go. I mean, the thing, just to kind of pick up on what we're talking about, because I think Deborah is also a woman of great wisdom, and I just, you know, how Deborah, do you stay strong and keep your spirits up and keep doing the work? What is it that inspires you to bring us together right now? You know, like you could be like, oh my goodness, you know, we're all locked down and we're this and that, but you know, you created this incredible moment that we're in right now. But what is it when you get up in the morning that says, you know, the only way to do it is to do it, right? and you keep doing it. What gives you that energy? What gives you that insight? What gives you the inspiration?
After 23 years, and this is just a piece of her life.
right.
Yeah.
You know, it's really hard to articulate, and you know, and voice is not something that I do well. It just is. I just have a warrior spirit, and more and more I'm thinking it's coming from grandmother, but it's definitely ancestral and maybe ancestors that I don't even know, that makes me know that I have to do this, that I must do this. It's not even something that I can even speak to. It just is. I mean, I just get up and I know that this is what I do. This is what you have to do. And that is it. And that's the beginning and the end. It just is.
Chadra.
Ooh, I have so many questions. You mean I just got one?
Well, just start, let it go. We'll see how much more she gonna give us. Just get.
You know, I don't give too much. But I am trying to write. Okay, I am trying to write the memoirs because I can do that better. Because you know I'm able to. But Chadra knows, you know, other sides of me too. That you know I'm such a low key person that people think that there's not that much fire there.
They are mistaken.
Right.
They are mistaken.
Yes.
Deborah looks at the fire and welcomes it. She is fire. She is fire. It's funny to think of a question for you. I just want to say, so I'm gonna get to my question, but I just want to take 1 minute to just say that I admire you. I do think that part of the reason I wound up at the African burial ground was to meet you. Because you were one of the first Black women that I met that was so proud to be Black, that celebrated her heritage, that spoke out against injustice, that believed in coalition work, that wore galas, that wore jewelry, that made clicky sounds. You know, I grew up in a very different environment around very different people. And when I met you, I remember thinking like, wow, she's beautiful, she's intelligent, she's well-read, she's passionate. And I've just always admired you for from the moment that I met you. And I just want to thank you, really. I met you, God, how many years has it been? Well over 20 now. And my life has been enriched because of you. And I look forward to reading your memoir. I do. I look forward to seeing what you have to say, because you have lived and traveled and done amazing things. And I'm just grateful. I know the ancestors brought me to you, because you.
Oh, I'm grateful for you. You've been a really, really, really good friend. You're a good friend to anyone that you connect. And it's been well over 20. And I remember the day that you walked in the door, because I think I was part of the interview.
You were.
Yeah, when you were interviewed, I remember the day when you walked in the door. So that was a wonderful day, and you turned out to be so good for the OPEI office, the African Burial Ground, and one of the best interpreters of the history.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I'm just grateful. I feel like this is how the ancestors work, right? So I work at the African Burial Ground. I meet you. Years later, because of the work around Toni Cade, I do Remembrance. I'm on the radio talking about Remembrance. Linda hears it.
Right.
She's writing a book on Toni. I meet her. You moved from Brooklyn to Charleston, South Carolina, doing Remembrance. You meet Brenda. And now all four of us are here on this call together. So I am so, people say.
And then when Linda came,
yes,
when we connected, when she came to Charleston to Avery to do the presentation, Brenda, I have this great photo of Brenda, me, Mama Helen, who passed away.
Yes.
You know, who was a midwife. You remember Helen?
Oh, absolutely.
Of course, Dr. Myrtle Glasgow is in that photo.
Right. She's gone. She's with us.
Who I think you had her mentioned in the book or something.
Yes.
Yes. So I have that photo, which is tremendous. I love that particular image. You know.
Oh, I attended that.
Did you attend that? You were there for that presentation?
I'd have to go dig through a bunch of pictures.
You probably were, yeah.
Or I slightly missed it. Either way. Well, you know, we called her Modupwe, Mama Helen Ibae, Modupwe.
Right.
And she came in on the midwife talk.
Yeah.
And
I had a chance to spend some time with her.
You and I have both. I think you took me uptown one time to meet a Puerto Rican young man who was initiated in Palo, and didn't we have a conversation about that? Because that's Brenda's path.
Palo?
Salam alaikum.
Oh, Brenda, we got to talk.
I didn't want to put your business out there, Brenda, but I knew I just had to.
I'm a 30-year in Leo. I'll be in the Leo on that side. Oche ain't my thing, but Palo, that's my world. Because
scratched.
Yes, there you
scratched
go.
A con.
In Jamaica last year for the first time in 21 years. I ended up doing 3 trips for a total of 7 months and spend more time with more Kumina people than anything else. And that's it right there. I'm like, because even when I lived there, I had nothing to do with Kumina. But see, I get here and then, okay, we got Palo, so we're going to slip into that world, and it's one and the same.
We got to talk.
I want to talk to you about, because I wanted to do some work in Jamaica around midwives. That's something that I've been holding in my mind for some time, and I've just never done it. So that's another avenue.
It's another angle. Yeah.
Listen, I literally found ways of, like I said, started off in buses. By the next trip, it was buses, and then the coaster one. By this last trip is nothing but coaster and taxi. Deborah went from one end of the island to the next.
With Brenda. That
There's
was
only,
a beautiful
only
thing.
2 or 3 parishes that she did not touch.
Right.
Going around and going into country and into bush where you need the services of that midwife.
It was amazing.
Because right now, they're going to return to the use of the midwife based on that case they just had a few weeks ago, where because everyone's tripping about COVID, the young lady ended up being in more distress than ever, but having gone to 2 or 3 hospitals.
Yeah.
And one of them having been a
That's
private,
something.
she already paid her money.
Yeah.
Now, there are spaces, say, up in a compound where you can see that if the labor begins and it takes you 45 minutes just to get down on the flat,
Yes.
you're looking at the Black River Hospital. So midwives have to still be in place.
Yeah.
So there are folks there. See, y'all done woke up.
See. So our
Yes,
compound,
yes.
we went to the festival up in a compound, and that's where the Maroons were. That's where they went. They went up to escape, or the colonial.
But that's sovereign nation.
And Brenda, to me, you said 45 minutes. I mean, to me, it took longer than that to get up that mountain.
Yeah, well, he added some extra stuff, but I think that one time when we came, did we ever come straight down? I mean, there's a one point making the same journey took 2 hours, and that was just getting down in the Santa Cruz. It's strange, certain levels
That was
of
powerful up there, way up in the mountain.
Have spaces who are, yes, they're doing farming, yes, they're looking at certain other measures. Some have said, okay, we have space, so we're having Orisha dance classes, but there's more than just dance to culture work. There's more than just drum knocking to palo work. It's we're able to literally go into spaces and places where you're still in the main measure of, well, let me get a rope to hold this person, as opposed to how it's evolved here, where wash them down a little bit, put a little honey or something on the tongue so we can hear what the message is.
Yeah.
Here we've evolved in some measure, evolved past the mayal, because we know that there's a message there. But the cool part about it is, for those who have not heard the rhythms in the longest, that's why there's some of the most watched videos that are either on the Facebook page or the YouTube channel, or I'll keep teasing them with that as background in my daily videos, because I need them to have a rhythm to recognize, to awaken that spirit within them.
So you got to plug into her YouTube.
Yes, I'm saying I do have to do that. Yeah. Well, we can talk. I'm definitely.
We looked at the Native American community. They were able to. It's like everyone got taught the jingle dance as a child, so everyone could relate to the jingle dance, and they use that in line with prayers for healing when COVID first started. And I saw that Facebook group go from essentially 0 to 65,000 within a week. And I kept saying, but wait a second, what do we as African descendant people, what one rhythm can we across the diaspora recognize, fall into?
Wow.
And it's not.
And that's what Toni said. There's no song. There's no
song.
Yes.
Right.
There's no rhythm. What can we connect to that we can kind of put out there, that this is what we do. This is and call upon that.
Yes.
I think that's what remembrance is, though, right? I mean, it's like
no, that's exactly what it is. That was the point.
Yeah. No. I mean, what you said, I'm like tapping into that presence, right? In the water, the power of the libation, the power of calling up the names of the dead. Like we gotta reach back into these things, these ways of being and existence that have worked for us.
It's true. And the way Brenda has embraced, the way she came in about 2012 or whatever, and embraced remembrance.
It's egg work. It's egg work.
It's egg work. And then when she told me that she's made through Olokun, and I'm like, okay, really? That's
that's
deep,
the only Ocha I have.
So
that's deep.
The combination, the Egun work and the Olokun, I'm like, wow. So now I see, you know, why you come and you just take this on and do everything and have really just help enhance everything that we do. You know, on a high, she's taking it to a higher level.
I'm being obedient. See, normally it would be just that day, regardless of what. Like I came back in the country, and as Deborah said, Regina said, I don't care what she does, long as she here that second Saturday in June. And then see, they've required more work of us in terms of what we normally would do. Because me, I just make sure batteries intact, cameras are set, I got some white clothes, maybe I got a little food. Okay, maybe from the average, it'll be that 9 days I'm running through. Because I'm telling everybody all the time anyway, second Saturday in June is coming. But this level of prep for it, these interviews have been amazing. These exchanges have been amazing. And this is where we literally, where I could see, okay, because for StreamYard, it only holds 10 with 6 on screen. Okay. This is where I literally say, hold up, no te puedo, boom, you're just gonna fly a plane over. Where I literally said, okay, now if I had all of y'all, all my participants, so they could see what they look like in that Zoom room. We have been to Nigeria, we have been to Tanzania, by way of folks who are Jamaican who live in Kenya. We have been down south to up south. We've been hoodoo, Ocha, voodoo, and we're being able, I think, even more so to bring a more comprehensive story to what we don't always get to share at Middle Passage, because as soon as it's sort of done, you made the offer and people are gone.
Right.
Now we have these longer conversations that I know folks will listen to, because regardless of what they're hungry and they're looking for some peace in their spirit.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, we've had joy. We've had an 80-year-old talk about listening to watching Girls Trek.
Oh.
We've had them stories. It's been beautiful.
But you know, remembrance doesn't have to end in June. I always tell people, you know, when I do remembrance ceremonies, I've done remembrances of the 16th Street bombing in Birmingham. I've done remembrances for the Oswald Conference, you know, the Association for the Study of the Worldwide African Diaspora. Deborah actually brought me to Charleston to do that. And we did one at William and Mary not that long ago.
We had the bag with her in a compound.
Yeah, so we can always, we are constantly remembering. Yes. You know what I mean? Even if it's not June, June is when we do our thing, our big celebration, our big ceremony, but we can remember throughout the year and do things to honor our past. You know, we must really. That's going to sustain us and keep us.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Deborah.
All right.
I'm going to
still got slick. Sandra still thinks she's slick. She never posed a question, but that's all right.
No, I got a question. Okay. I know a lot. I know a lot, but so let me ask you a question. So people may not know this about Akua, but she is a huge, I would call, what do they call it? Ethnomusicologist. She is huge into music and has, I don't know if she still does, because I know she gives stuff away, but at one point had a collection. I mean, she could tell you who the singers were, who the this, who the that. So I'm just wondering, as you were writing, Akua, are you going to do any writing about maybe the influence of music in Black culture or culture across the diaspora? Like, are you going to create anything around music specifically? Because I know that's a passion of yours.
You know, that is a big passion. I guess I'll have to. I'm just trying to remember everything because there's so much. And now that I'm just home and retired and have time to think, things are coming back to me about things that I've done, because, you know, I'm sure like everybody here, we don't even remember what we've done.
Right. That's
I
right.
mean, it's so much. So the music part has been huge.
I know.
That's been a huge part of my life. Developed programs for, in schools for young people. And yeah, so music has always been, a real comforting source to my soul. And I've had to, and I enjoy music from everywhere, from all over the world. So I have collected that kind of music from the diaspora, and enjoy it immensely. So thank you for that. Yeah, I'll have to make sure that I tune in to that and plug into that and listen to music on a regular basis.
Yeah.
So it's been all kinds of music. It's not just R&B. It's not just
jazz.
It's not just spirituals. It's jazz. It's reggae. It's everything. It's African high life. It's it's all kinds of music. I love it.
I look forward to reading that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Muchas gracias, ladies.
Thank you.
Until we meet again.
Yes.
Okay. Love.
I'm so glad it worked out. I'm so glad my grandson was.
That make use of the younger generation.
Yeah.
It was meant to be. It was meant to be.